executive order. And so, like I said, we rescheduled our meeting, and we were busy behind the scenes coordinating across IARPC. And so we invited the Coastal Resilience team to co-lead this meeting because they have interest in this executive order as well, and a responsibility to report on some of the same activities. And Kelly, who was also instrumental, who's doing the roll call, was also instrumental in reaching into NOAA, where she is stationed, and finding the appropriate point of contact. And so I think, you know, I would probably let Kelly run through the rest of the agenda and inviting people to speak at their appropriate times. But basically, we want to do a high level, not more than 5 minutes overview of the executive order. And then this is going to be process heavy, so I'm sorry for folks who are not part of the government, but that's the way we like to think about this. And we in IARPC have a process to report on research activities, and in particular, these two performance elements that are listed here. And one in particular that the data team is responsible for reporting on, 8.4, needs to be updated. Or no, sorry, it's 9.4.5, because it has some language that is a legacy from the previous administration. And so if we carry these forward as something that we're still pursuing, the language needs to be cleaned up. So that's the main outcome that I want from this meeting. And I know it's probably not as exciting to all of you, but we also have the opportunity for each of the agencies who are responsible for these activities. That's NOAA, USGS, and NGA. I've heard of representatives from each of them on the call, and we will just leave it open for anybody to contribute to that. Maybe just going in that order: NOAA, then USGS, then NGA. So I'd like to focus most of our time there, and then bring it back to that performance element discussion so we get that outcome we're looking for. So we might not have time for everything, but let's just see how it goes. So Kelly, did you want Ashley to do the number 3 on the agenda?
Yeah, actually, if you're prepared to give us a brief overview on what the memorandum says, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. I should say this is not my first IARPC meeting either, but it has been quite a while. And I was kind of laughing to myself because I think I wrote those performance elements on mapping when I did participate in the prior administration, and Sarah will know. So it's kind of funny, it just comes around again. So this presidential memorandum on ocean mapping, I have to say, is the most exciting thing for us in the last 3 years to actually see the words ocean mapping in such bold print. It's divided into 4 major sections. The first one is the policy statement that basically says, you know, ocean mapping is essential for so many activities, both commercial and coastal resilience and tourism, environmental protection, navigation, all of that is in there. Kind of a big summary of all the reasons why you map in the ocean. And then saying, you know, that it's important to do that, and to stay on the cutting edge, we need more of it. So then it goes into the second section. And when I was first thinking about this, I thought, oh, of course, you're just going to be interested in the Alaska part, but actually you're going to be interested in this part too, because this is really the ocean portion of an ocean mapping strategy for the nation. And of course, the Arctic is included in that, Alaska is included in that, and it directs NOAA to work with actually the Ocean Policy Committee agencies to work with NOAA to pull an ocean mapping, exploration, and characterization strategy together. And those are all the agencies that were listed at the very first part of this document. And it, in the fine print that you don't see here, but in the notes for this, when it was being developed, it really refers to the Interagency Working Group on Ocean and Coastal Mapping, which again are all those agencies, federal agencies that are interested in mapping. So this is an ocean strategy. It is being co-chaired by two people at NOAA, Admiral Shep Smith in the Office of Coast Survey and Alan Leonardi from the Ocean Exploration and Research Program. With representatives on a task force from all those different agencies that want to participate that may end up being the interagency working group people, or representatives from those agencies, and then the writers would be the IWG. That's still shaking out right now, who an agency may name, but it will pretty much devolve to the interagency working group for writing, but it will be called the Ocean Mapping Exploration Characterization Task Force. So that's the ocean mapping strategy. It's got a very tight timeline. We have to have a first draft by the end of January, a second draft by the end of February. They really want the final draft by April 1st so that it can roll into administration level reviews by OMB and other sort of administration offices. And the goal is to release this strategy at Capitol Hill Oceans Week, which is in June. So there's a 3 months of clearance process built in, clearance timeline built in. So that's why there's this strong push to get it done by the end of March. If you'll scroll on down, you can just see it coming up there, is a paragraph on the mapping coastal Alaska. And this is really picking up an activity that is already happening up in Alaska, which is the development of the Alaska Coastal Mapping Strategy between NOAA, the Alaska Ocean Observing System, the state of Alaska, USGS, and the Alaska Mapping Executive Committee, which is AMEC. You'll see that AMEC called out here as well. So this is language that is capturing that activity. We feel like it's pretty well in hand. You'll be interested in seeing the draft of that. We're aiming for the end of January as well, just using the same timelines that I just ran through for you a second ago. We're pushing this strategy development into that same sort of calendar. Again, hoping to be finished with it by the end of March so that the rollout to external stakeholders can happen in April, starting with the Alaska Surveying and Mapping Conference. So this strategy, just to be really clear, is very coastal, shoreline, nearshore. And then the ocean strategy in section 2 will bump into this one. So it will have complete coverage for Alaska, but they'll be kind of in 2 parts. And really that's almost technology based, right? More airborne for shoreline, more ship based for deeper water. And then the 4th part, which I am not involved in, but other parts of NOAA and other agencies are, is the streamlining of permitting activities to allow this mapping. Obviously, we care very much about NEPA and environmental compliance and making sure that the sonars we're using in mapping are not destructive, that the sub-bottom profilers we want to use to map the seafloor, seabed, and deeper are not overly intrusive. So that portion is being handled by our environmental compliance folks. And that's pretty much it. It's just a kind of a whirlwind timeline. I think I'll be taking a deep breath in June. And you'll have opportunities along the way to review, to weigh in, to add comment, starting at the end of, probably the end of January if your agency is not involved already, which it very well may be. I'll stop there and if there are any questions. No questions?
Muted. My bad, I was talking and I was muted. Yeah, no, I was just saying thank you, Ashley, and pointing out that I dropped some text in the chat, and then also in the agenda is the link to the full text, so folks can read through it at their leisure. Ashley, I'm really excited to hear that you were a part of the team that wrote the first couple of performance elements here, because I think that's what we're going to transition into next, is looking at the performance elements and just giving them a quick overview.
Okay, is it all right if I stay on for a while? I will drop after that if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Or I guess if you need to go, we'd like to hear about what NOAA's plan of action is, if you guys have one already.
Okay, so the plan of action is that Admiral Smith and Allen we are getting the task force together, confirmation of names of agency reps who are going to be on this writing team. I think there are going to be some kind of half-day retreats, if you will, or meetings, first week of January, second week of January, some offline writing just to get a first draft together by the end of January, and then really refine it in February, so that it's very close to being done. There's an outline for the document. I could run through the high points of that if you want me to.
Sure, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I think that's,
well, I'll be
that's
right
actually
Jonathan, if
fine
you
for
have
this,
anything.
the level of detail we need to get into. It sounds like actually what you're doing is helping to write the strategy documents.
Yep.
There will be a small team of agency representatives involved with that.
Well, it will start out large, but I think, as usual, it will probably consolidate into, a few writers who are able to actively engage in it.
I mean, you told us, basically you broke down what the executive order was, but can you give us a little higher level overview of what you think the strategy would include, what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so the strategy is going to obviously talk about the drivers, whether it's this presidential memo or laws, initiatives, mandates. That's all kind of usually how they start out with, here's why we're doing this. Talk about the parameters, defining what is included in the EEZ. Of course, all of the Arctic, the U.S. Arctic is. Great Lakes, territories, possessions, that kind of thing. But for the Arctic, I think it's the ARPA definition, but focusing on the U.S. pieces of the ARPA definition. Then we will talk about what mapping, exploration, and characterization mean, defining those terms, and hopefully landing on definitions that are consensus definitions. We're going to talk about what makes a priority area a priority area. The big exercise probably that will involve agencies will be the kind of inventory of existing resources, capabilities, and data, right? So we're not repeating effort. We're not being redundant with collection or indicating priorities where we have data that can suffice. And also the tools, technology, and platforms that we have. So everything that is existing. And then identifying priority areas and then the gaps to achieving mapping coverage of those areas. And what are those gaps? Apart from what agencies can do in new and novel ways, different approaches, maybe changing how they do certain things, there's still going to be primarily a funding gap, as we always come back to, right? Especially in the Arctic. We know how to operate up there. It's just really a question of the resources, the funds to actually get it done. And so we will identify those Hopefully we'll be allowed to keep them in, but we're planning to identify them at least in the drafts. And then we'll talk about, okay, how do we address that gap with what we're able to do already? And then opportunities for partnership and collaboration. And then what, after all of that, may still not get done because we haven't been able to close, we can't think of a way to close the gap other than new resources. So then there'll be a conclusion on expected outcomes based on the strategy. And I think that's kind of pretty roughly the outline.
I have a question about your reading of this executive order. It talks about non-United States government entities. I think I said that correctly. Who is that referring to, and how are you going to treat that in the strategy?
Non-United States government. Where?
Yeah, let me see if I got the word right.
Oh, okay, so non-United States government entities could be like in partnership with Canada. For example, you know, the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission. Those really, Canada would be our closest partner and has worked with us in the past on joint mapping for extended continental shelf in the Arctic. In other regions, it might be other nations. I don't think it's expecting that the Chinese or other countries that are doing mapping in international waters and perhaps our waters as well are suddenly going to share their data, but we can certainly ask them to. But I think that's what it's referring to.
Yeah, it's not referring to like private organizations, NGOs.
Well, that's going to be part of our opportunities for collaboration. First is shaking the trees for existing data, which may come, you know, in partnership with oil and gas companies. We've gotten some data from Shell and some data from the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation. And there could be other entities. I think there's a renewable energy company up in the Chukchi that wants to share data. And so, yes, it could come from other entities.
And I just have one more question. I'm sorry to hog this, but I spent some time looking at this, and in section 4, which you said the environmental compliance folks are going to look at.
Yep.
There's, in addition to streamlining, there's also a focus here on efficiency. And I think you hit on that with your systems and data. You know, if there's already data out there for a given area, don't duplicate that that survey. You know, this is an opportunity to use those resources elsewhere.
Yes, there's going to be a big concerted effort to talk to universities, NGOs, private sector for sharing that data finally. We constantly, as you know, we produced a bathymetric gap analysis with the Seabed 2030 initiative. Does that ring any bells with anybody? This global initiative to map the seafloor by 2030?
Yes, MGA, Maritime Safety.
Yeah.
Aware.
So, you know, we have this map of bathymetric of gaps, and we constantly, I'm finding, and my colleagues are finding, you go to a conference and someone says, oh, I have data there, or I know about data in that gap. And so we know it's not to say that, you know, people are hiding all the data that we need, but there are data sets that have just somehow not found their way into national archives like NCEI, which is formerly NGDC. And I would bet that a lot of that data was collected in some way, in part by federal dollars through grants and that kind of thing. And really, that data should be there. It should be publicly accessible by now. And so, again, not to say that all of that data is great data or all of that data will solve all our problems. We do think that there is data out there that could be useful that we don't know about yet. So let's be on this call. I would urge you maybe to ask your colleagues, do you have data hiding in a drawer?
Right. And, maybe it's hard to do anything about that data that's already been collected, but if we are permitting this activity, the survey, then we have teeth. We can stipulate a requirement to archive the data and make it publicly accessible and so on. And that's the power that the government has. It hasn't chosen to use that power, but maybe this, through your strategy or other means, other interpretations of this executive order and implementation, there will be a push to make that part of the permitting stipulations.
Well, we do have those requirements on grantees, and still things don't end up in archives. So maybe part of this strategy, we could, say, let's put some teeth into those sorts of requirements. Permitting, for the most part, in this type of activity really means, in a lot of ways, means permitting federal actions, like permitting federal mapping for these activities. And in some cases, other exploration work. But in a lot of cases, I think we actually have that language, but aren't enforcing it to our detriment.
This is Mike Brady with NGA. I think in this context, it's important to potentially, thinking about updates to the language in the performance elements, the Geospatial Data Act of 2018, which is a new law since, those PEs were written, that I think is very relevant for this context, essentially providing some legal framework that encourages sharing across government and other boundaries. So just a piece of legislation to keep in mind when thinking about rewriting the performance elements.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Do you have anything from the NGA point of view on maybe sharing previously classified information to maybe help out this effort?
Well, you can't share classified information. NGA has a lot of unclassified activities that are relevant for this work, and with this executive order, I think, and I think this is the topic of this call, there may be impetus to look into what is being done. My understanding is that NGA has, this is the kind of work we do looking at these performance elements. We certainly do work in these areas, and up until now, I think we've more or less satisfied those areas. But I think with this executive order, now there's motivation to look into, what are the updates? What's the status of that work? That being said, I'd be interested in analyzing the work that we've been doing in terms of these performance elements with those updates to really, draw a line of sight, like what is the impact of some of the updated work we've been doing, and how does it benefit and put this executive order on good footing. So that's a conversation I think we should also have, giving credit to what agencies have done, have been doing when we go, look for these updates. So to answer your question, well, first of all, we can't share classified information, but there is lots of unclassified efforts, and I think a next step from my perspective is we're a big agency, is to go out and look at everything we've been doing, and then and really sharing. So this is a good platform for sharing those updates. Unfortunately, right now I don't have updates. I think the updates that are in the performance elements that's my update. I'd have to go reach out to colleagues to figure out where they're at with these various activities.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. So for anyone on the call, if you have any updates to the two performance elements listed, it's this 8.4 effort here. 8.41 specifically and 8.42, as well as performance element 9.45. I can drop the links in here and you can add a comment at the bottom to update the performance element, and we can get those approved so that your agency's activities are reflected in the IARPC annual report. And so we're aware of what everyone else is doing.
Well, since we hit the two agencies, NOAA and NGA, let's ask USGS to comment on anything they have to report.
Hi, this is Ann. Sorry, we dropped off the call for just a minute. You're just looking for updates on our shoreline mapping and charting activities?
Or the issue dealing with the broader EEZ. So it could be, you know, near shore, or it could be the deep water as well.
So as far as near shore, well, coastal mapping work, this may not be an update, but you know, we've collected LIDAR data and structure from motion coastal elevation data between the Bering Strait and the coast of, or the Canadian border, about 1.5 kilometer swath along the coast. And then the state, using similar techniques, have mapped down from the Bering Strait to, I think, Port Hayden area. That's just coastal elevation data, no bathymetry. We have collected a bit of bathymetry in Unalakleet this past summer, and we have a continuously operating coastal observing camera, which we are using to validate some total water level modeling efforts that we have going on, and extracting nearshore bathymetry data from that and coastal morphology data from that. As far as the EEZ work, we do have an ongoing Law of the Sea project. I'm not exactly sure. Well, we're definitely not collecting any new mapping data. There is a group here that's working on Arctic marine minerals. And unfortunately, that researcher, Amy Gartman, isn't here, but we do have some activities in the Arctic with respect to that. And I think that's it.
That's great. And does anybody else from USGS want to comment on a response to this executive order that maybe add to what Ashley and Mark already said, or it can be different?
And I had a follow-up question for you. So where does all of your USGS bathymetry data live?
Our bathymetry data?
Science base.
Yeah, in science base. Right now, we just collect the data that the data that I'm talking about, has not been published yet. We just collected this last summer. I think our, multi-beam data that we collect and things like that do end up in NGDC database. But as far as our bathymetry, coastal bathymetry data, it's not published yet. The LIDAR data is available. It's available on Digital Coast and the state elevation data portal.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, well, so yeah, thanks for the updates, and we're kind of skipping along here. I want to look at these performance elements in some detail, and so I guess we're actually moved up to number 6. So when I say update, I mean look at the language in the performance element itself, and specifically for 9.4.5. Try to understand why, how this what this was intended to do, and if it's still relevant or if we need to update it. And I'd like, just for my own edification, to hear about what Coastal Resilience, how they are using their performance element. From what I've heard is that it hasn't been very active in the past couple of years. So maybe what Kelly was talking about, where agencies go in and provide other, actual yearly updates for reporting would help us address that issue, even if we don't have to change the language of this. So I guess since they're on 8.4, let's look at what these performance elements are. I'll just read them out loud, so I can follow along myself. So 8.4 is improve observations, mapping, and charting to support research across the coastal interface. Okay. 8.4.1, update the National Spatial Reference System in the Arctic to enable integration of baseline geospatial data sets in coastal areas to support research and predictive capabilities across the coastal interface. So the last update was 2 years ago, so we're kind of hurting with that, and I think we just heard about activities today that would add to this, but staying at this level of the performance element, is that still applicable? Is there anything in the way that's written that's getting in the way that we could address through minor edits to it? Is this consistent with the new executive order and what it's calling for?
This is Mike. I would have to look into the state of the National Spatial Reference System. It could be updated, in which case it may not be necessary to call it out in this performance element. May need to focus on something else. So I think, and this is a broader question I have for you and the rest of the IARPC team. What is the process for updating these? Is it something that's proactive and structured, or is it calls like this where you just kind of ad hoc collect updates? I'd be curious about the procedure, because NGA is a huge agency, as many of the agencies here on the phone are in similar situations. It's difficult to know what everyone is doing and has done. So it takes some effort to collect all of that to provide really accurate updates. But so that would be my, in terms of updating language, I would need to do that kind of research.
I guess in that case,
yep.
So say that they did it, whatever this called for, they said, oh, check. It's been, the National Spatial Reference System has been updated. That's very hard to change this because you want to actually check this off the list. So all you need to do is check with your folks in NGA and say, okay, confirm that's been done. And we can move on to some of our other performance elements. We don't need to dwell on this.
Jonathan, this is Colleen Strawhacker, just to plug in here. Yeah, so we can kind of put in actions that say that it's in progress based on maybe what Mike hears back from his colleagues. But I believe, and I think Sarah Bowden might have left the call, but if we want to update the actual text of the performance element, we need to draft that, and then the IARPC staff group needs to approve that editing of the text of the specific performance element.
Yeah, hey, and this is John Pierce. Thanks, Colleen, for that note. And it is quite a process to update performance elements. And so when these were written, these were active projects by federal agencies, which is why they're in the current plan. So at this point, I think it's already been stated that if there has been progress made on this, then we should update that through calls like this and meetings like this online with everyone, and demonstrate some progress there and inform us all of that progress. And then we're sort of halfway through the plan, if not more than that. So we're about to start sitting down and drafting the next plan. And so we'll definitely take this conversation into consideration as we draft that, and maybe there needs to be some language about the new memorandum and new activities that agencies are going to take on to move forward with it.
Yeah, so this is actually, I mean, from the perspective of NOAA, if we were filling in responses on updating this particular performance element, we would say it's not complete, we could report on the advances that have been made with continuously operating reference stations and the geoid gravity data collection for geoid modernization in Alaska and the Arctic. You can see it right there, GravD. So we'd probably update that language to where we stand currently.
Yeah, this is John again. That would be fantastic if you could do that.
Yeah, and if anyone has anything that they want to update related to these and you're not sure about the process, feel free to email me. I'll put my email address in here, and I could do it for you. I can walk you through it.
Okay, and this is Mike with NGA again. So many of these performance elements it's not something you check off necessarily. Many of these are or should be ongoing, such as integrating baseline geospatial data with research and predictive capabilities. That's something that is an enduring challenge. So the language about checking off doesn't really resonate with a lot of these. And that said, you know, you can interpret these tasks many different ways. So charting in the Arctic, for example, there's a lot that is involved in that issue. So it's one thing to maybe chart a new port, but it's quite another thing to chart with a new electronic format that better meets the user needs. So these are all things that, you know, really need to be unpacked in qualitative terms to really make sense to a lot of the agencies that are doing these tasks. So just maybe a note on language, and that will bring me back to my earlier question, is that the process of getting these updates, especially with enduring challenges, you know, it's not something that you get one update in 2017 and that's it. It's something that's got to be this proactive engagement, constantly interacting with the various agencies to develop relationships in a conversation way to kind of keep the updates going.
Mike, this is Colleen Strawhacker. I couldn't agree more. I think we have the performance elements there. There's a diversity in how they're written, and some of them are kind of a checkbox. We created this product, it's available to the public, et cetera, et cetera. But some of them are absolutely an ongoing process and something that I hope we never stop doing. So one of the coastal resilience team's program elements is kind of engaging coastal communities in the coastal resilience collaboration team activities, which is something that, you know, is never complete, as you know. So I think, yeah, there's a diversity in how they're written. And I think just showing the progress via the updates to the performance elements is critical. But I agree, kind of being careful about the language about how we're checking them off or not, but just making sure that we're keeping the activities updated to show the progress that we're making.
Absolutely, thanks. And Mike again, NGA. So yeah, I'm just focusing on these performance elements. Obviously, the ones related to charting is very relevant for what we do in the Maritime Safety Office here. Of course, for those that don't know, we focus on, while we support domestic charting, NGA focuses on waters outside of the U.S. And the language here, it references Arctic waters, which is, of course, is not just U.S. waters. So my assumption is this is a U.S. interagency forum. My assumption is that the focus is on U.S. waters, and especially with this executive order, this call is obviously focused on U.S. waters. But these performance elements, if they do refer to Arctic waters more generally, that's another one of those ongoing, enduring challenges where NGA does create charts for new ports in the Arctic. So in some sense, we are expanding our charting. But that's not something we necessarily flag as relevant for this forum. But I'm certainly happy to include that, other outside of U.S. Charting activities if we think that's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that the performance element is written, that it includes across and in Arctic waters. So if you guys have any updates related to that, we'd certainly take them. So back to kind of the original intent of the meeting, when we look at this language, update baseline mapping and charting across the Arctic, including additional charting in Arctic waters, updates to baseline topographic mapping and supporting data, and updating high-resolution imagery-derived elevation data, repeated coverage. Multi-agency partners include Alaska Mapping Executive Committee, Alaska Geospatial Council and the Arctic-related LCCs. So is this still, do we require an update in light of the presidential memorandum? Should we add a line here about Alaska EEZ specific, or is that kind of contained within?
This is Mike. Are you referencing a future update to the performance elements?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the LCCs are inactive, but I'm not sure if that is always going to be the case, that they'll be inactive. So maybe by 2021 there'll be more activity. I don't know. But certainly,
yeah.
these are all enduring challenges. These are all things that will continue and are relevant.
Yeah. Sorry, just what are the LCCs again? I'm a newbie here. So. This is Kelly, by the way.
The landscape conservation cooperatives. They're essentially, my understanding, boundary organizations that kind of work with, crossing the practitioner science boundary. And they're broken up into regions in Alaska, kind of similar to like the Sea Grant interface and other U.S. states, but they've like declined recently. So you're missing that nice interface with especially the local communities. I always wondered what the LCC's role was in this performance element. It wasn't always clear to me, but at any rate, I think in 2021 there's definitely a need to look at the agencies involved and include others that are relevant that have emerged, include language like spatial data infrastructures and other like more modern language that's relevant for these elements. But as far as right now, I mean, I think the task thinking about this new executive order is to reinterpret these performance elements in light of updates from agencies and identifying through analyzing what we've done in terms of what's relevant for this executive order. And that said, I mean, that's a process, especially when you're dealing with huge agencies that do a lot of great work. To collect all of that is an arduous task. So in addition to this phone call, I'd hope that there's some follow-up with some more structured and proactive way to collect systematically some of the updates that are relevant that be brought to bear in this executive order.
Yeah,
I'll put that.
Yep. I was trying to report on this last September, and I wasn't clear if it was no longer needed or relevant, and that's why it wasn't of intense focus or interest. And clearly it's needed because now we have an executive order. So how can we reframe this, or do we just leave it alone and expect people now to be able to report much more readily since they have the executive order? I don't know. And I'm trying to look in the document, in the executive order itself, and it should have, I recall it has a list of agencies that are called out specifically. I thought maybe we could just replace those. If that has a more updated list of who's responsible for this, for the Arctic, it'd be easier just to align with the executive order and call out those same agencies. I think it called out the state of Alaska. I don't know. Okay, yeah, here it says the state of Alaska and the Alaska Mapping Executive Committee. They're developing the strategy. Oh, that's the same. Okay. Well, who's this Alaska Geospatial Council?
Hey, this is Ashley. Molly will know that one too, but those are folks in Alaska who are focused on mapping of various things in Alaska.
Yeah, Jonathan, my thought on this is that it might not be worth the effort at this point in time to update the language, but with an understanding to, we can put in an update kind of explaining how the LCCs are defunct at this point, and just, you've put in this update regarding the memorandum, and we can expand on that and say, it calls out these partners to do X, Y, and Z, and maybe that this is something that we can look at in the next IARPC plan. What do you think of that?
It's easy.
We can get with Sarah about it as well. I think that, she'll have a better sense of when these things are actually kind of drilled out in detail during the plan process.
Yeah, I believe that Fish and Wildlife and maybe NPS, they were involved with the LCCs. So they're not on the call, they can't speak to that. And if it's still something they're interested in or pursuing. So absent their input, I think we just leave it in.
Yeah, so this is Mike Brady. I would also, I can't speak for the LCCs, but my familiarity with what they did or they're meant to do is extremely important. And because they're inactive doesn't mean that they're extinct. So you don't necessarily want, I like to see the LCCs in this document, even if they're inactive. And I don't think it's necessarily important to pull it out unless, there's a good reason from the perspective of the owners of, that mission. But certainly this is something that is not necessarily to do with the amount of work that would be put into updating the language before 2021. I think it's something to take another look at when it's time to update the whole plan.
Got it. All right, well, I'm glad we had that little discussion. We got a ton of questions in the chat, and I was just reading along and realizing we wouldn't have time to address any of them. So I'm sorry for folks who called in, and it might require a follow-up meeting where we're gonna, I don't know, get updates on the performance elements and address some science questions and the science policy interface. Honestly, we don't know yet. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what I would suggest is we follow up with a meeting in the June timeframe, June 2020, when all of that activity that Ashley was talking about is completed. And then we should have answers, be able to answer these kinds of detailed questions. And it also gives us time to kind of get organized here.
Yeah, and I think Ashley mentioned that June timeframe would be about the time where they would be accepting public comment. So that sounds like a good plan. And coastal resiliency, if you guys want to kind of put that on the next year's plan, we can have something already on the calendar.
Okay, so just a couple minutes left. We'll just leave it open. If anybody wants to chime in with any last thoughts, or just want to wish people happy holidays or whatever, that's fine.
This is Mike. One more. Sorry, I keep chiming in too much. What are your thoughts on following up with some kind of set of questions for the group to provide some structure to the next call, so we can have kind of a formulated response from each of the agencies and broader perspectives from others that may be supporting that aren't listed in these performance elements. Just I'm thinking like a couple of questions. Please provide some updates and your interpretation of how it's relevant for the EEO. That's just an idea.
Yeah. So we can plan that. So those questions would be the topic of the June meeting. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting, and I don't want to create more work for others, I'm suggesting sending out something by email or through IARPC to collect information from the different agencies. Like me, it would be very helpful for you to ask specific questions so I can go through the arduous work of getting good answers for you. And then I'm prepared for the call. And I think other agencies may be similarly situated.
Yeah, can I just suggest something, because I know there's that interagency group that's going to be writing. They will do an inventory as part of their work. So I think all we need to do is get someone on that team to coordinate with us and give us information that's relevant to these performance elements. So we're not sending out multiple inquiries in parallel. And that was also part of the idea of waiting till June, because you let them do their work and then we can come up and follow up as needed after that. Does that seem reasonable, Mike?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that other interagency effort. I'm curious to know how that would work. Do you have any insight on what the plan is for that?
Yeah, like they're going to go through an inventory, activities, tools, data sets that are being used by the broader community. So not necessarily, they're not going to reach out to every research entity like we might try to do in IARPC, but across the federal government, what are the resources going into ocean mapping? And so that's an important part of their strategy, because they need to get a baseline and then they can see how much they can accomplish with what's actually already funded and ongoing, and then identify the gaps and needs for possible additional funding. So all I'm suggesting here is that we coordinate, have at least one person who's cognizant of these performance elements on that team, and we can ask Ashley for that person who's going to do that for us, so they can feed that information back to us, and we kill two birds with one stone.
Okay, I have lots of questions about that. We can talk offline because we're out of time.
Yeah,
these
let's follow up.
Elements are very important for that EO. So I think we would be the people that would be involved in that process, the interagency group. But more questions for later. Thanks, John.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, happy holidays, everybody, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from us soon again. And safe travels if you're leaving Alaska or going abroad. So talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining, and I'll have the notes posted from this probably by the time you all get back from holiday. And please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to put you in touch with Ashley if you have anything else. And those who submitted things into the chat, I will follow up with you this afternoon. So thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.